that the purpose of the reconstruction programme post-conflict in Iraq is not, in fact, primarily to do with the consequences of any military conflict, but is actually to do with reconstructing the country after the years of Saddam Hussein and his rule. Secondly, I would say to him, yes, we will make sure that the funds are available. Indeed, funds have already been earmarked for this purpose, and the International Development Secretary, the Ministry of Defence, the Treasury are doing all they can to make sure that we coordinate with American allies and also with other UN partners to make sure the funds are available, but also the programmes available, so that in the post-conflict situation in Iraq, the people of Iraq are given the future they need.
But the related issue arising from the last few days, which is the Middle East roadmap. What is the status of this in the eyes of the British government, given that the Israelis seem to feel that it can be altered as it progresses?
Well, our commitment is total to the Middle East peace process and to the roadmap being published. That is the clear commitment that is being given not simply on our own behalf, but on behalf of the President of the United States. Of course, both the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government can make their comments, but the roadmap is not simply a set of principles. It is a detailed process for getting to the point of establishing a viable Palestinian state and an Israel confident of its security, recognised by all its neighbours. And we are totally committed to ensuring that the roadmap is fulfilled.
Charles Kennedy.
And can the Prime Minister also reassure the House that he will maintain the pressure, as he has already, on the American administration to ensure that they continue to back the momentum for that process?
Well, I think it's worth just reading what the President of the United States said last Friday on this subject, because I think this indicates the degree of commitment that he has given to this. He said that the government of Israel, as the terror threat is removed and security improves, must take concrete steps to support the emergence of a viable and credible Palestinian state and to work as quickly as possible towards a final status agreement. He then went on to say, "We expect a Palestinian Prime Minister will be confirmed soon. Immediately upon confirmation, the roadmap for peace will be given to the Palestinians and the Israelis." And he went on to say, "America is committed, and I am personally committed, to implementing our roadmap toward peace." That is his commitment, it is my commitment, and we will work hard to ensure that it is delivered. In any military conflict, we will operate in accordance with international law. Any weapons or munitions that are used will be in accordance with international law, and I can assure my honourable friend that we will do everything we can to minimise civilian casualties and indeed maximise the possibilities of a swift and successful conclusion to any conflict. In relation to any weapons or munitions that we use, we will only use those that are in accordance with international law and with the Geneva Convention. That is the responsibility of the government and the commitment of this government and indeed has been of other British governments in the past. And I do say to my honourable friend, we will do everything we can to minimise civilian casualties. And the reason why, in respect of any military action we take, that we get legal advice not merely on the military action itself, but on the targeting, is in order to make sure that that happens. But I do say this to my honourable friend. Of course, as I understand, if there is conflict, there will be civilian casualties. That, I'm afraid, is in the nature of any conflict. We will do our best to minimise them. But I do point out to him also that there are civilian casualties occurring in Iraq every day as a result of the rule of Saddam Hussein. And he will be responsible for many, many more deaths, even in 1 year, than we will be in any conflict. We have made detailed preparations for the possibility of any terrorist attack, as I'm sure the honourable gentleman knows, and we've also spent several £100 million ensuring that we both have the equipment and the planning in place. I will not go into the details of each part of that, but I can assure him we are well aware of the risk that this country, indeed all countries, suffer and face at the moment, and we are doing everything we can to prepare against it.
The UK, along with dozens of other nations, stood shoulder to shoulder with the US over Afghanistan and now Iraq. This loyalty has been rewarded by the Bush administration by imposition of steel tariffs, the withdrawal from test ban treaties, introduction of farmers' subsidies in America, contempt for the International Criminal Court. He has reneged and rubbished the Kyoto and Johannesburg Treaty. He has scuppered your own attempts to try and develop an open dialogue with the Palestinians in January. And can my right honourable friend use his now legendary powers of persuasion to convince President Bush to develop a world vision that is worthy of his great nation?
Well, I gather he's not a total fan of President Bush, as I can tell by his remarks, but I would say to him that there are three things that I think are important that President Bush has agreed to, and I think it's as well to balance what he has said by these. First, President Bush did actually take the case of Iraq to the United Nations. He was asked to do so and did so, and he agreed Resolution 1441, and I say and say again, it is not him that walked away from that deal. Secondly, in respect of the Middle East peace process, my honourable friend will have heard the words that I spoke a moment or two ago, quoting President Bush and his commitment to that, and I do point out he is the first American president to commit himself to the two-state solution of a state of Israel and a viable Palestinian state, and we are also working closely on a new UN resolution in relation to reconstruction. I have to say there are disagreements about trade, but I mean these are familiar disagreements not merely with this American administration but previous American administrations. There was a time when I spent a large part of a couple of years ago dealing with the issue of cashmere sweaters and under the previous Democrat president. So these things happen, and I have to say also that America isn't the only country.
What message does this send to other corrupt regimes? And what is my right honourable friend's strategy for a return to a world order in which decisions are taken lawfully through the UN rather than by the world superpower? Or is it too late? And with his help, has the foundation stone for the Pax Americana already been laid?
I mean, first of all, the reason why we were prepared to offer such a possibility was to avoid war, which is, after all, what I thought my honourable friend wanted. If she was saying that President Bush had been too soft on this issue and should have said that we would remove him in any event, then I could understand it. But I have to say to her that we are in a position now where we did want to try to avoid conflict by having him voluntarily disarm. Then, if he refused to do so, we were prepared to give a further chance to resolve it peacefully by getting him to leave the country. But now we are faced with the prospect of either leaving him in place without disarming him or making sure that we remove him from power. And I really ask my honourable friend to consider this, that if we do remove Saddam from power, as I believe we will have to, because it is the only way of disarming Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, I earnestly say to it, the people that will rejoice most will be the Iraqi people, who will be free of a murderous tyrant who has done nothing but damage to his country. And if she wants to know what Iraq could be like, talk to the people in northern Iraq who, because of British and American pilots in the no-fly zone, have actually been able to build something of their country, and she can see that the true impulse of the Iraqi people is for greater freedom, democracy and prosperity and the rule of law. Well, I think, first of all, I would say that people in Kosovo, as people in Afghanistan, whatever the difficulties, are infinitely better from being removed from the rule of brutal dictators, whether Milosevic or the Taliban. I think that is the first point. The second point, however, is that we have to stay in for the long term. I mean, it will be easier over time, but in Kosovo, as in Afghanistan, we cannot make a short-term commitment. We've got to make a long-term commitment to reconstruction and rebuilding those countries. But for all the difficulties in the Balkans at the moment, and most obviously after the appalling assassination of the Serbian Prime Minister recently, the Balkans is at a point where it is a better prospect for peace and prosperity than probably at any time in the last 100 years. And that was because we were prepared to take military action in order to remove a regime that was preventing that prosperity coming about. First of all, the humanitarian relief that is necessary as military action gets underway, and that is something which the International Development Department and the Foreign Office of the Ministry of Defence are working very closely on, with obviously our military allies, in particular the US. And indeed, I took a meeting on this issue myself this morning. But the second aspect will then be for the humanitarian assistance in the post-conflict situation, and that should be done under a UN resolution, as with the administration. And of course, we want to involve as many countries as possible. Well, there are issues, obviously, about the UN Security Council and reform of it. That's something we would have to discuss with others. But I think the issue, in fact, is not really institutional. The issue is whether we can construct a sufficiently strong partnership between Europe and America and a global agenda around which people can unite. If they can't unite politically, then no amount of institutional tinkering will actually help us resolve those problems. And that is why, at the end of this, I think we need a period of reflection and see how we put that partnership back together and see how also we construct the global agenda that I think would bring in a lot more people to our way of thinking. And that, I think, whatever the institutional arguments in the UN, is the essential thing. Propensity towards total irresponsibility by Saddam, but I can assure him that we are fully committed to the protection of cultural property. That is not merely the government's position, it's also what we're committed to under the Geneva Conventions, and I can assure, and I understand the Foreign Secretary has talked to him about this, we will do everything we can to make sure that sites of cultural or religious significance are properly and fully protected.